that's what passes now as public intellectualism, is saying, if in some alternate reality, something that didn't happen happened, then I would have been right. Jesus, Sam.
Dane, for the main topic, to get back to that lovely old Trump Derangement Syndrome, who is most affected by it in this week's snooze?
We have, as we said in the outset, a repeat offender.
Oh, no.
Sam Harris.
Oh, Samuel.
Who, David and I were familiar with him. We weren't like regular consumers of his content, but we were familiar with him pre-Trump, pre-COVID, yada, yada, yada. And, you know, he's like any sort of public intellectual, right? He's got hits and misses here and there. God knows we probably do.
We are all flawed.
But TDS has really, really just completely eaten away at this guy's brain, such that the points that he tries to make barely make any sense. And this week, for the second time on this podcast, and maybe he's been doing it on other places, but this is the second time we've called out Sam Harris for such things, is he's appealing to dead children to make some sort of point. If you recall, when we were talking about when he did an interview with about how evil and terrible Trump is, he said that he would literally not care if there were actual dead bodies of children found in Hunter Biden's basement. That wouldn't change his vote for Joe because Trump is just that bad. Well, now, this past week, Sam Harris said in an interview that if COVID had killed more children, there would have been no fucking patience for vaccine skeptics. And he's very quick at the end to walk it back and say, I'm not saying I wish it was worse than it was, and I'm not saying I wish more kids would have died. I'm just saying that in some alternate reality that never happened, that if more kids would have died, I would have been right. Well, I don't know about you, David, but if I just make up any sort of random bullshit that I can pull out of my ass and say, well, if ifs and buts were cherries and nuts, then I'd be right about everything all the time.
Merry Christmas.
Wouldn't that be a world of an interesting world to inhabit? But yeah, that's what passes now as public intellectualism, is saying, if in some alternate reality, something that didn't happen happened, then I would have been right. Jesus, Sam. Jesus.
Samuel fucking Harris. I gotta tell you, it's hard to totally digest that all in one sitting.
Yeah.
But I don't know how. I think there's a huge lack of self-awareness in this culture right now. I think there's a huge lack of individual accountability. And I think that with that, there is a fevered pitch that when you just get mad enough and you think you're a member of the tribe, whether it be liberal or conservative, that you just go out and you can say whatever the fuck you want. But unfortunately for you, Sam Harris, the guy that you voted for is called Pedo Pete by his son in his phone. The guy sniffs children's heads. The guy has been in Congress for how long? Since at least 1994, where he wrote the
70s. He was first elected in the 70s.
Right, but he wrote
the
crime reform bill back in 1994, right? Mm-hmm. Which basically made it illegal to be African American. Did he ever go to Epstein's Island?
I don't think his name has been mentioned in any of the books or anything.
Thank goodness. But the guy that's been doing little to nothing but build his own repertoire in this country. Oh, by the way, what happened on Hunter Biden's laptop? What's coming out now? That he was getting paid $49,000 a month in rent from Hunter Biden?
I don't know.
There's been a lot of kooky stuff that's happened that they accused Trump of doing. Imagine, and I know we've brought it up on the podcast before. Like, imagine Donald Trump Jr. had a laptop like Hunter Biden had. Imagine the FBI raided Biden's house full of documents and not Mar-a-Lago. Imagine that. It seems as though the left just has this returning bullet that whatever they shoot to the other side always comes back and pings them right in the fucking forehead. Like, they accused Trump of being a Russian Manchurian candidate, I believe, is basically what they said, and said the election was rigged. Well, come to find out that Hillary Clinton paid for Russian information upon Donald Trump during the campaign. And then on top of it, the next time the Republicans lose, which is the next election cycle, they say the election was rigged, and people take a protest and storm the Capitol, and they say that was the darkest day in American history. It's like you can't have it both ways. It's either treason when you guys do it, and it's treason when they do it, or it's not treason either way. Like, you can't have a legitimate election when you win and an illegitimate election when you lose. Like, this is the dichotomy of reality that you guys are causing right now. And it's perfectly surmised, from what I've heard, in Sam Harris's rants that make no sense to anybody that's other than is it the phrase is a dyed-in-the-wool liberal? Would that be it? Or am I using that terminology wrong?
I mean, what you're saying, whether he claims to have been, I don't know.
No, I'm saying he is like fervently in that camp, and he idealizes within that camp. So he thinks that he can't say anything wrong as long as it sounds like something the camp would agree with.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
So he's willing to go way out on that limb just as long as all the rest of his party agrees with him, despite the fact that it makes no sense and is based in nothing but vitriol. But they'll adhere to it, and we'll find a way to do it. And guess what? That rift between this country goes like that each time we don't do anything about it. That's my rant.
I mean, and what he had to say, I mean, really gives up the whole game from their side, right? Because he's saying if it would have been much worse, or if the age variable would have been flipped to where it wasn't old people that were dying at really high rates and it was young people that were dying at really high rates, then he would have got what he wanted, I presume, in terms of like mandatory vaccinations and cards and tracking. And they would have got all of the things that he thought were just wise public policy if it had been worse. Well, first of all, okay, Sam, but it wasn't. And not for lack of effort, because you and your side from the very beginning were saying how bad it was going to be and who was all going to die and da-da-da-da-da. And it wasn't. It just wasn't in terms of how bad you said it was going to be and what it really was. So again, you can theorize all day long about what might have happened in some alternate reality where none of that shit happened. And yet you still tried to get away with that bullshit anyway. You've given up the whole game. But even if you hadn't done that, the real kicker to this whole thing is, so what? So what? Let's say you're right, Sam. Let's say you're right. A lot of kids died instead of older people. And that created much, much more public backlash against people that didn't want to have a medical procedure forced upon them, a jab shoved in their arm against their will, up to and including strapping them down to a table to make them do it if they didn't want to. Let's say that you think that's a good, healthy society and that's a good way to be, right? And you got it because a lot of kids died. What if you really won with that argument? Is your position more morally correct? Because at the end of the day, we're still talking about violating one of the principal rules of the Nuremberg codes is you don't force medical procedures on people. You just don't do it, because that goes to very dark places very quick. So you still have no moral legitimacy to the point you're trying to make. All you've really accomplished with your little thought experiment here is you've created an alternate reality where more people happen to agree with you than actually did because it wasn't as bad as they said it was. So you've won nothing. You've just got more people to agree with
I
an
would argue the
immoral
same.
position for what? So that you can be, I guess, at least perceived as marginally less of a piece of shit because more people agree with you. It doesn't matter if everybody in the world thinks that something immoral is correct and the right thing to do. The one person who stands against it is the only one who's right. So even if your thought experiment went exactly as you wanted, it would have accomplished nothing from your side of the ledger.
The only thing I'll take issue with is the simple fact that you think that he gained anybody on this. He's only talking to his base.
No, I'm saying if he did, even if he did.
I can't imagine.
Again, I'm steel manning his argument.
Right, you're steel manning it, but I'm just trying to bring it back to reality too. He's not talking to normal people when he's ranting like this. There's no way he can be, because normal people are starting to see people have fucking normal lives after this thing. People can move past Trump. People can keep living, but certain people are still stuck in the past and are terrified that Trump will get in office. Why? Was Apocalypse Now visited upon us when he was in office? No. The worst thing that happened was something that happened outside of his jurisdiction. Halfway through his fucking presidency, was it halfway or was it three-quarters? It doesn't matter. COVID happened during his presidency. Everything up till then, the stock market was soaring. This country was looking good. We were still in a war that we'd been in for 20 years, but name another president within the last 20 years that couldn't say that. Like, things were they were operating pretty normally, but his side was just fervently going after him, finding another way, going after him, bringing his family in to go after him. It's like, at some point, you just have to stop and say, hey, this isn't working. This isn't helping anybody. You're not trying to help anybody but yourself by making this video. Self-interested people, to go back to our former topics. I don't know where it goes from here, because I'm an optimist when it comes to people. I always think that people can be turned around. But if you have this ideology that you just can't move past this one thing, i.e. Donald Trump's presidency or anything related to it, and you think that that's the bane of human existence, then you're not worth saving. No offense. If you're saying that kids need to die to make you right, but you're willing to say it, then you're beyond saving. Go out, push yourself onto that ship with the rest of your little party, and enjoy yourself.
Well, and as we gave Pavarov the last word in the segment about him, because he deserved it, for the opposite side of the coin, because Sam Harris also deserves the last word here, but for reasons of infamy, we're gonna, I'm just gonna let you hear one thing that he had to say, because again, he, as we said, tried to walk this whole thing back, saying, "Well, I'm not wishing for that. I'm not hoping it would have been worse. I'm just saying."
By the way, he recorded it and then uploaded it.
He said this, quote, "In some sense, we got unlucky at how benign this was." Now, David and I said throughout COVID, and we weren't the only ones.
More people should have died.
And we weren't the only ones who said this at the time, but we said in no uncertain terms that the COVID cult is a death cult. And the reason why we said that at the time is because if you presented good news to these people who thought the sky was falling, they would be, much like the CNN host to Dr. Wynn, they would be incredulous about it. They'd be like, what do you mean this isn't very risky to children? What are you trying to say? That children shouldn't get vaccinated? What do you mean that people have natural immunity, have sometimes better protection than people who have the vaccine? Are you saying that if they've had it, they shouldn't get vaccinated? What do you mean? Like, all of these things that we would think are good news, right? Because it's going to be less death and it's going to be the virus is taking on less and less, risky variants and all that kind of stuff. Maybe more transmissible, but not as deadly, right? All these things that are good news if your perspective is one of, I value human life and I want less people to die. But yet when these people heard this information, they were almost angry at you for telling them this good news. In much the same way, Harris will say, I'm not wishing that this bad stuff had happened. I'm just making the point. But yet he says again, and I'm going to give him the last word. I'm going to read the quote again. In some sense, we got unlucky at how benign this was. How am I supposed to take that any other way, Sam? It is not unlucky in the slightest if the way that it actually played out saved, a handful more lives than if it was as bad as you hoped it would have been. That's not unlucky. That's the opposite of unlucky. That's lucky. We had no reason to expect that this thing would disproportionately target, older individuals such that we could identify a very clear group that was at high risk and protect that group. Remember focus protection? Remember the Great Barrington Declaration? Remember Jay Bhattacharya and Sunitra Gupta and Martin Koldorf from, podunk institutions like Stanford University, Harvard, and Oxford, who said that we know who the at-risk groups are. Let's protect them and let the rest of the world get on with itself. Remember that, Sam? We were very, very lucky to identify those groups, and had we listened to those experts, we could have protected those groups, not destroyed the global economy, not sent billions of people back into living well below the poverty line, according to the World Health Organization and the World Bank. We could have saved a lot of death and destruction to our global society if we had listened to those experts instead of the ones that you wanted to listen to, because those experts were looking at reality. They were looking at COVID as it was, not as some hypothetical that you wanted it to be to justify mandatory vaccine people. So you're going to have to miss me with this. I wasn't actually wishing for it to be worse. When you say we're unlucky that it wasn't as bad as it was, I'm going to have to call bullshit on anything you say after that sentence.
They don't call lucky?
Sam's last word.
You know what they don't call lucky?
What?
A heat-seeking missile. You know what they don't call lucky? Something that was created in a lab. It's almost like they wanted it to happen. Anyway, Samuel! Stop fucking up.